will there be a push across the finish line from lobbyists and people who work for HPS to get us to that point? Does it apply to the hiring now of constables who are going through the process of trying to become a police member here in our community? And so there's a lot of gray area here that should make people feel very uncomfortable in the community in terms of where we've been over the last several weeks. And I think we've seen some letters to the editor and some public comments on the streets, on TV, and on the internet in terms of how the public feels about this. And it is a dangerous precedent, and it's a slippery slope.
It really, in the public perception, it could even extend in their mind into cases are pursued, what cases aren't pursued.
Well, I mean, where does it stop in terms of budgets? If we've seen some past clashes with council and the budget process, and council's pushback in that regard. And now, will we see a lobby group form to pass a budget that may be unpalatable to council, but there may be some behind-the-scenes political movements to push it through? It could apply to pilot projects that we end up adopting with lapel cameras and other issues that are on the table. And so you start to ask your questions, if it applies to the hiring of the chief, where does it stop when it comes to police service board issues?
Did you receive any direction from your fellow councillors as their representative on this file?
No, I think we all voted with our conscience and with the information that we had in front of us.
But Lloyd said that he had heard from plenty of ordinary folks that they wanted to keep the chief. Have you?
That may be true. I think there may be a split in the community in terms of whether or not we retain the chief or not. But I'm speaking specifically to the process that we have here. I think the whole issue of whether the chief stays or leaves his position has been overshadowed by this lobby process. And as I said, in my mind, it's compromised the integrity of the process, and it's probably the type of process and decisions that were made 40, 50 years ago. But times have changed. We have a very open and transparent process that's in place, despite the fact that the decision today was behind closed doors. I found it strange and odd that the board received a confidential memo stating the intentions of the chief, and a half hour later the chief was on the radio speaking to that same issue, which clearly had confidential written all over it. So that in itself is concerning as well, in terms of what issues then are left confidential and which ones are publicly disclosed either by police service board members or by the chief himself.
What do you want the chief to change to rebuild the relationship? Because it sounds like the relationship's broken.
Well, I think the chair can speak to that. He's had discussions with the chief. I don't think the board's received anything at this point in time that suggests that things will change in terms of some of the problems that we've experienced from a governance perspective. We've received nothing either from the chief or the chair to suggest that. I guess time will tell.
Chad, what do you think of this will do to the morale of other senior officers who might have been considering applying for the chief's job?
Well, it calls into question the integrity of the process, and it seems to be a process in which it's maybe who you know rather than what you know. And I think most people in the community have been concerned about that whole issue in terms of where we're going with the hiring at police services and where we go from here with major decisions that are on the horizon. Again, will lobby groups and individuals help us cross the finish line on controversial split issues that from time to time appear at the Police Services Board?
Do you feel better that Lloyd said that it hasn't cost taxpayers anything to vote so far for another?
Well, that was sort of a footnote in this whole story. I mean, it's small consolation that we had to start that process, and we're very fortunate that the company who's going through this and is under contract on another process with us, very fortunate to have had the invoice waived at this point in time. And I think that was kind of the least of our concerns, as we're going through this process. But it calls into question, how will we go through this in the future when it comes to the deputy chief? Are we going to see this same shadow campaign? Are we going to see individuals publicly disclosing their support or non-support for individuals who are either internal candidates or externally from other communities?
Chad, I asked the chair upstairs whether he thought it was appropriate that a small group of unelected officials and wealthy lobbyists could pick the police chief of a major Canadian citizen. He disagreed with that characterization. He said that's not what happened at all. How do you feel?
Well, I completely disagree, and I've said from the start that we have a process that allows people to share their opinions with us. We have a delegation process that allows people to come in and speak to certain issues. We certainly have the local media, whether it's TV, print media, or the internet services that are provided through the media, where people can share their opinions. I think all of the local outlets have run polls in terms of where we should go with this process. And we're certainly open to receiving open correspondence through the board if they want to share those opinions with us. And we did receive some of those in an open way. I think the problem that we have is that there's a shadow process that's been in place, that's been behind the scenes. It hasn't been open, it hasn't been transparent, and I think most people would be guessing as to who's involved. Certainly a couple of people have come forward and made it known that they were part of that group, but there was a larger group that was involved, and the fact that that's happened behind the scenes, in private quarters, in private conversations, and who knows, maybe even on the golf course, I think is concerning from an optics standpoint and procedure standpoint.
Ted, what should the chief have done then if he wanted to stay? Should he reapply?
Well, I think that was certainly one of the options. I believe that his correspondence to the board in terms of openly stating that he wanted to come back was a step in the right direction. However, I don't think we fully understand, why he was leaving in the first place. And so I'd hate to be in this position another 10 months, another year from now, another 18 months from now, where we receive another letter because maybe an opportunity has come up elsewhere and we're in the same position that we were in just a few short days ago.
Maybe coincidentally, the lobbyist registration is coming up on Wednesday, and I think you said you were going to try to tie it in. What are your plans?
There's no doubt. I mean, this is the poster child for the lobbyist registry locally, and I know that when we started debating the lobbyist registry, I was one of those individuals who was uncertain at the time. And this one helped secure my position with it. And I know that we've looked at services and purchasing goods and even policy decisions it applies to. This is a case in point and should be used to ensure that we have wording in that draft bylaw that speaks to our hiring process. It's absurd that we're actually talking about it today, but what's happened over the last month, I think, has almost forced us to make that part of the conversation.
Do you have confidence in the decision of the majority tonight that this can work?
Well, we live in a democratic process. We've received assurances from the chair of the board that he will be meeting with the chief and going over some of the issues that have, I think, plagued the board and the community in the past as it relates to governance. And I guess time will tell whether or not he delivers on that.
Can you just expand on that? Give us some specifics. What has played?
Well, I'm kind of in an awkward position because I'm a new member with the board. It's probably a better question for Terry and others who've been there for quite some time, but it's no secret that we've had issues over the budget process. It's been no secret that we've had just consistent split decisions at the board with some very important work of the Police Services Board. And so it's not a good trend. It's certainly part of the democratic process, and the process allows for that to happen. But it's unlike a relationship you'd probably see on most other boards, agencies, or commissions.
Terry, do you want to weigh in on that as someone who's been on the board longer?
The question?
The question is the chief's relationship with the board.
Well, I think there's no question that it's been stormy to some degree with some members. Let's be clear, not all members. Anyone that has a different point of view certainly felt the wrath of the chief, and certainly council. So I can tell you that I had a direct discussion with the chief about those issues. It's my understanding that he was a superintendent in Toronto and never really got exposed to the governance side of things, and acknowledged that there's some weaknesses that needed to be worked on. And unfortunately, that relationship, obviously between myself and the chief, it got to the point where I was putting my hockey elbow pads on and going into the board meetings because I knew what to expect. That's not a healthy environment for the community by any stretch of the imagination. Felt very comfortable with the discussion I had with the chief. No question about that. I did offer up a resolution at the board that would see the chief stay on for a shorter term so that we can measure those kinds of issues, because it's pretty clear through my consultation, whether it was with women's groups, whether it's with my councillor colleagues. There was a number of issues with councillor colleagues, for example, where they felt that at the time that the chief and how he approached them in regards to particular issues wasn't becoming of a chief. And that was a concern, and those are real, and I shared that with my board members today, because they don't necessarily, wouldn't necessarily know that these things took place, and there's 4 or 5 councillors that came across these kind of experiences. So that's the context, but clearly the discussion I had with the chief painted a picture where he recognized some of the shortcomings and where he needed to put work. And it wasn't just from me, it was from obviously others that talked to him about where he needed to make changes, and I think he recognized that. So that was a promising piece. So I did put an offer up, understanding that there are some that are still skeptical in regards to on the governance side, that it was shorter term. And in that shorter term, if everyone's really confident about the chief's ability to deliver in sincerity, then it shouldn't be an issue. Unfortunately, that didn't succeed. The proposal as was and ended up getting supported by the majority of the board. I thought that it flew in the face of what I was hearing in the community in regards to taking short steps, baby steps before you take that big leap of faith. And I wasn't quite there yet, although I felt more comfortable. It's unfortunate that the decision that was rendered is what it is without getting that 5-2 vote or trying to get more on side. There was an opportunity for the chair to get more on side. If in fact he had accepted the proposal I put forward, he chose not to.
How long did you want him to, how long was your proposal for, a year?
Pardon?
How long was your proposal for? Because I understand his contract is being renewed for another 2 years. How long did you want it to be renewed for?
I don't think I can get into that detail because we're getting into an in-camera discussion.
Can you elaborate what you mentioned women's groups? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I've attended events where I was told by representatives of different women's groups they had some concerns on some of the culture issues regarding domestic violence, and that they felt that the board should stick to their original decision. I heard from both sides. I heard from people that support the chief and thought he did a wonderful job, and I heard from many people and what they call themselves as blue-collar people who indicated that they felt that the board should stick to the decision. And what I heard absolutely, without a doubt, is the clearest message I've ever heard, is I was concerned about how this was being perceived. And it's unfortunate because whether you're wealthy or whether you're poor, you have the same rights in a democracy to provide an opinion. I think the question really is when you look at perception, sometimes in politics, perception becomes reality.
So on the lobbyist registry, you were a member of the Transparency Accountability Committee that took a long time to get to a draft. Has your opinion on it changed since being on that committee after this experience?
Well, I think I've had discussions in the past. My problem with the lobby registry is that it doesn't go far enough. I believe that there's many components in this community that take advantage of lobbying councillors on many different fronts that should be included. Unfortunately, this lobby registry is really looking at people just looking for money. It's not just about money when you're looking at influence, and I think that that the definition of a lobbyist and who meets that criteria needs to be broadened, because the way it is right now, I don't think we're getting value for the dollar.
So are you looking at amending the proposal on Wednesday to make it stronger?
Absolutely. I'm looking at expanding it to ensure that anyone that has a discussion with the councillor, regardless of where they're from, that's lobbying us on a particular issue, needs to be part of that lobby registry. That's about transparency and accountability.
On the chief and yours relationship, the chief now has a second term. Are you planning to change any way that you deal with the chief to try to resolve some of the challenges you've had?
I think that's pretty clear that the way things were running between the two of us, it wasn't healthy. I think there's an acknowledgement between the two of us having that sit down that it wasn't in the best interest of the city to continue going down that path, and mistakes were made on both sides. But we want to be clear on both sides. And so I think there was a real comfort level with me leaving that discussion that the chief was going to make a sincere attempt to address some of his shortfalls, and that I'm happy about.
Well, can we invite you over for a moment too and hear your thoughts on today? Yes, of course we do. So your thoughts on how this turned out? Was this what you expected?
I'd rather not answer this. The only thing I'd like to make a statement on is I hope the chief gives the same consideration to every member of this service as he's received today. That's the only thing I would like to do.
You mean if an officer says they want to retire and then they decide they don't want to?
Yeah, I hope he has the same right as the chief had today.
I could take it that you're not entirely supportive of what came out of the meeting today?
Well, I can say that personally I did not vote for it.
What would be your preference? That he reapply for his job and go through the process?
It's always been my stand for the chief to for the process to stand and for him to reapply with other candidates. And I think that would be for the served, and in my opinion, that would serve the service better and the taxpayer better.
Did you share the concern that Councillor Collins mentioned about the public perception that, there were powerful people who were unelected who were having their voices considered? Do you share that concern?
Well, I think Chad pretty much covered it, and whether I shared it, I think, the only thing that I'm concerned about right now is that this is a process issue, and I've been on this board for about a year, so this is, I'm a businessman, so it's very difficult for me to actually digest situations like this. There's people that have been on this board that have probably know this, they breathe it, right? So in my case, this is all new to me, so it's very difficult for me to make these type of opinions.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Haven't met.